Fly this jet and I'll marry you." He said it with a smirk certain the janitor would crumble under pressure, a billionaire surrounded by cameras trying to humiliate the black woman who'd spent 5 silent years cleaning his hangar. But when his pilot collapsed and the investors began to panic, she calmly stepped forward, took the yoke, and changed the story forever. They expected a maid, they got a captain. What no one knew was the truth she'd been hiding all along, and it would leave the entire world speechless. Golden hour poured through the open mouth of the hangar at Opalaka Executive, turning the Bombardier Global 7500 into a sculpture of glass and burnished metal. The APU was silent. The only sound was the faint squeak of a maintenance cart as Ava Sinclair nudged it along the polished concrete, the wheels keeping a rhythm she knew better than sleep. Navy coveralls, a Scent Global Air patch, a plastic badge that read, "Maintenance Staff." Her hands moved by habit, aligning bottles, coiling a cord, while her eyes kept drifting to the cockpit, to the overhead panel she could have mapped blindfolded. Across the bay, Sterling Hayes paced in a Brioni suit, a metronome of impatience. His assistant trailed him at a jog, pressurized by the ping of incoming calls. 3 investors, elegant, watchful, stood a little apart, recording snippets for people who waited in other time zones. 3 hours from now, we have to be in Chicago to finalize 3.5, Sterling announced, voice pitched to Carrie. We need wheels up in 30 minutes. If we're late, they cancel. Cameras drifted, catching for an instant the rectangle of Ava's badge. She kept her gaze down, then let it tick upward where sunlight made the cockpit glass look like a lake. Her cart clipped a dangling power lead. A sharp, metallic clang ricocheted through the hangar. Sterling's head snapped. The help should know their place. He said, not a whisper, not a shout, calibrated cruelty meant to land in other people's ears. One investor looked at his phone. Another shifted, uncomfortable. The assistant chewed her lip. Ava steadied the cart. 5 years of swallowing replies stood between her and the man who loved the sound of his own certainty. A strangled groan broke the standoff. Garrett Sterling's pilot folded at the waist by the stair, skin gone paper white. Seafood, he breathed, sweating, clutching his gut. I can't. Not today. Get me a backup, Sterling barked. Orlando's 3 hours out. Houston the same. Rodriguez is overseas. The assistant rattled phone to ear, eyes begging the screen to turn up a miracle. 30 minutes to wheels up, Sterling said, composure cracking like lake ice. If we miss, the deal dies. Ava put down the mop handle. The sound, it was always the smallest sounds, made everything else still. I can fly it, she said. Silence drew a tight wire across the room. Sterling's laugh was quick and bright, showman's timing. The janitor, fly my $75 million jet. He circled her gaze, flicking over stained coveralls, work boots, the badge. Tell you what he said, performing for the phones. Fly this jet successfully and I'll marry you. Fail, and you're fired for good. Ground crew looked at their shoes. The investors glanced at one another, caught between spectacle and disgust. Ava met Sterling's eyes and did not blink. Then she reached into her inner pocket and drew out a small leather wallet worn smooth. She opened it and held up an airline transport pilot certificate, the foil crest catching sunlight, and beneath it a type rating for BD 700 to Global 7500. Current. Valid. The smirk fell off his face as if pulled by gravity. Ava didn't wait for permission. She walked past him, past the cameras, past the assistant's hands, twisting themselves into knots. The stairs rang under her boots. We'll be wheels up in 25, she said over her shoulder. Behind her, phone started whispering to operations. In the space where his arrogance had been, Sterling felt the shape of something he had forgotten how to carry, doubt. He checked his watch and said, as if granting mercy, proceed. Inside the cockpit, the air was different, cleaner, colder, hers. She put the cart of her life behind her and slid into the seat that had once been the contour of her days. Fingers hovered above switches, then pressed flicked verified battery on external power disconnect, APU available. The checklist cadence settled her pulse. In the cabin, voices rose and fell. In the glass, a reflection she recognized looked back. Ops Control called the hangar office. An investor's camera kept rolling. Underneath the noise, a thin, almost forgotten image moved in her mind. red earth in morning light, the blurred rotor disk of a second ship in formation. Not yet, she told the memory. Not here. She entered the route OPF to ORD into the FMS and let the machine draw a white line through blue sky. She was done being invisible. She would make the world reach for her, not the other way around. Down on the floor, operations began stitching legality to urgency. FAA registry search. Simulator transcripts in an email from a facility 2 hours north. The insurer on speaker one-time clearance Part 91 reposition PIC Ava Sinclair, ATP BD 700 typed. The assistant read back the name as if testing a foreign word. The hangar felt like a lung that had been holding its breath for 5 years. Ava touched the yoke and felt the old answer in her hands. The investor in the aisle pressed record. Sterling watched through the forward galley, the foundering thought in his eyes: how many people had he never seen at all? Operations signed off with the speed of a hospital triage. Verified. ATP and BD 700 type current. Insurer green lit a Part 91 reposition, the ops chief said, voice clipped but steady. Manifest updated haze plus 3 passengers. Sterling nodded like a man performing approval for a jury already in session. Ava moved through before start after start, each line a rung up a ladder she had once climbed in her sleep. Battery on, APU available, external power disconnected. She set departure performance, computed V-speeds, loaded the SID. In the reflection of the avionics, her eyes were calm. She keyed the intercom. Please secure the cabin for departure. Cameras wouldn't care about that sentence, but pilots did. She paused just long enough for the cockpit to fill with the hum that belonged only to aircraft on the edge of becoming. And then from a place 5 years and half a world away, another hum rose, the thin, high keen of a tail rotor losing itself. Dust the color of old blood. 2-ship formation over a valley chiseled by wind. 2 reduce collective auto-rotate. She'd shouted then, voice breaking on the last verb. The second ship yawed, spun, fell like a string cut too fast. Maverick's voice almost playful even then. Tell my girls I love them. The horizon tilted. The comm went white. A single chime present and clear snapped her back. Garrett groaned somewhere below. Ava inhaled through her nose, filled her lungs with the present tense, and keyed the radio. Opa Laka ground. November 7. 3 Alpha at Ascent Hangar IFR to O'Hare, ready to taxi. N73A taxi via Lima, hold short runway 9er right. Taxi via Lima, hold short 9er right, N73A. She released the brake and let the big jet roll, feeling mass and precision partner up under her palms. 17 minutes had passed since the promise she'd made at the base of the stairs. 13 remained. At the hold short line, she ran the last check set, flaps confirmed trim, briefed the departure. The tower frequency crackled. N73A runway 9er right, cleared for takeoff. Fly heading 090 climb and maintain 5,000. Cleared for takeoff 9er, right heading 090 climb 5,000 N73A. Throttles forward, airspeed alive. The runway lighted a centerline into the future. V1. The word dropped between heartbeat and decision. Rotate. The horizon slid nose up, mains whispering free. Positive rate. Gear up. Miami fell away in rectangles of light and shadow. She could feel cameras in the back the way you could feel lightning before thunder. The global settled on its climb like a thoroughbred finding stride. Contact departure 124.7. Miami departure N73A passing 2,000 for 5,000. Heading 090. N73A climb and maintain 15,000. Proceed direct to assigned fix. Climb 15,000 direct as assigned N73A. Sterling came up to the cockpit door and didn't cross the threshold. He stood as if entering would ask too much of the person he had been. How long, he asked, his voice absorbing the dull shock of humility. Ava watched the altimeter unwind into 5 digits, the VSI steady and sure. Estimating O'Hare in 2 hours 55, she said, "We can make your meeting if they accept a remote pre-brief en route and a 15-minute buffer on arrival." The assistant was already tapping, whispering to Chicago, asking a roomful of suits to bend 15 minutes around a machine that had chosen a woman over a habit. Contact Center 132.5, Center 132.5, N73A, Miami Center N73A, leaving 13,000 for 15,000 direct as assigned. N73A, climb and maintain flight level 350. Climb flight level 350, N73A. There was a moment in every climb when the world became an atlas and the cockpit a chapel. The clouds ahead shifted from molten gold to a blue so thin it felt like breath. Ava leaned into the quiet. Instruments in the green pressurization, steady fuel flows where they should be. She had missed the math of trust. In the cabin, an investor narrated softly in Mandarin for a live audience she'd never meet. Sterling watched not the screen, but her hands. He noticed the economy of motion, the way expertise had no vanity in it. He tried and failed to remember the last time he'd been in a room with doing instead of talking. "Mr. Hayes," she said without looking back, "please remain seated during climb." It wasn't a rebuke, it was a boundary. He stepped back, one hand on the doorframe. "You actually know what you're doing," he said, and heard how small the sentence sounded. At 350, she leveled and let the autopilot take the weight. The cabin softened. The jet slid into cruise as if it had been made to continue forever. Ava let her pace slow, half a breath. "We'll road around a cell building west of Tallahassee," she said to the room behind her, more for the record than the men. "Expect light chop otherwise." In another life, she would have let the horizon be enough. In this one, she needed more. She reached for the radio again, the voice smooth as a blade. "Center N73A, request minor deviation left of course for weather. Approved as requested." The global banked a few degrees, obedient. Ava's reflection moved across the dark glass of the instruments and lined up with the sky. In a pocket of quiet, Sterling's whisper returned from the doorway he had retreated to. How she didn't answer. Not yet. There would be time at altitude for the friction of truth. For now there was a machine to fly a timeline to salvage a promise to keep. The jet slid on a silver line, scribing new math across a blue map, and for the first time in 5 years, Ava felt the future approach at the speed she could bear. Cruise at 350 turned the jet into a hush of silk. The engines were a steady breath behind the bulkhead, a soft pressure against bones and teeth, the kind of sound that made conversation feel rude. Afternoon light spread in bands across the clouds, burnishing their tops to gold and leaving their bellies the color of riverstone. Ava trimmed a whisper out of the pitch, touched the heading bug 2 degrees right, watched the magenta line on the nav display recenter. Fuel flows, balanced pressurization, steady route, intact and simple. In the cabin, the investors spoke in low voices and filmed behind half-raised phones. Sterling had stopped performing. His body language learned stillness the way a ship learns the feel of deeper water. The silence wasn't empty. It carried. To Ava, it felt clean, a counterspell to the derision in the hangar. Up here, control wasn't a word or a posture, it was numbers that lined up, enunciators that stayed out a horizon that sat where you put it. She rested her hands lightly on the yoke and let the autopilot do the work it was designed to do. Every now and then she adjusted a dial just to feel the certainty return to her fingertips. A knuckle tapped softly against the cockpit door. "Doors unlocked," she said without turning. Sterling stepped in with the hesitancy of a man entering a chapel after years of laughter. He sat down in the right seat and kept his hands carefully to himself, eyes wary of every switch and lever, as if the wrong glance might set something off. "How did you do this?" he asked after a moment, the question shaped by a voice no longer sure it deserved answers. "Who are you, Captain Ava Sinclair?" she said, steady, not defensive. "United States Air Force, retired. Your military was. 8,000 hours. Type rated for bombardier." She let her mouth twist at the corner. "And apparently for cleaning floors too." He absorbed that without flinching. Then, under the ambient hum, something in him loosened. The angle of his shoulders dropped a fraction. The bravado he lived on had burned off somewhere in the climb, leaving a man who could look and maybe even see. The desert rose in her mind before she asked it to. 2 airframes skimming above red earth, baked to glass-brown ridges peeking through like knuckles. Maverick's ship sat off her left, the rotor disc a spinning moon. Another milk run captain he'd teased on the interplane the way he always did when the sky looked easy. The failure came without prelude, no stutter, no cough, just a sudden yaw that ripped the ship sideways. The tail swung out too fast, and in the heartbeat between physics and memory, she heard herself say, "To reduce collective autorotate." The valley spun like a coin on a table. Then Maverick laughing for the last time. "Tell my girls I love them." In the present, Ava tightened her grip once on the yoke and released it. The cabin chime pinged politely. Someone laughed in the back at something on a phone. She drew air in through her nose and let it out slow. 3 months after that, she said, voice even eyes, scanning engines pressurization, TCS, "A drunk driver killed my partner and our 2-year-old on I-95 while I was in a simulator block." A sergeant started a sentence with, "We're sorry to inform you," and nothing that came after mattered. Sterling didn't say he was sorry. She was grateful for that. He listened. The right seat listening that made good co-pilots more valuable than good money. "I resigned the next day," she went on. "I kept my certificates current because muscle memory is a stubborn thing. Took sim time at night when I could afford it. Learned where not to go in my own head. Ended up here because engines don't lie. People do." He nodded once, twice. The pose of a penitent would have insulted both of them. This was better. He angled toward the windshield and watched the air go by the thin blue layer of it stretched taut over a world he had tried to stack under his name. "Captain Sinclair," he said at last, and there was no irony in the rank "you're." He stopped, corrected himself, chose a word that didn't turn her into a trick or a trophy. "You're extraordinary." "No," she said, and adjusted the heading again, nudging around a thin line of weather that would shear lightly if you begged it to. "I'm just visible now." The jet slid through a high veil of cirrus like a swimmer slipping under a sheet. Beyond it, the sky opened into a clearer blue. The sun crested the panel edge and spooled light across the glare shield, across her hands, across the instruments that made sense of motion and made motion honest. In the glass, Sterling's reflection looked smaller than the man who had paced the hangar. He turned his head and watched the cloud field ahead, not as a backdrop to his narrative, but as a place he did not control. For the first time since she had met him, Ava believed he might be capable of an answer that wasn't about himself. Behind them, the investor's commentary continued for an audience elsewhere. Up front, it was just the sound of air hurrying past an airframe and the certainty of numbers aligning because someone competent told them to. Ava reviewed the descent forecast, recalculated their time to the top of descent, and felt the smallest lift in her chest, a sensation she hadn't let herself name in 5 years. Not peace. Not yet. But purpose returning on schedule. Chicago approach, November 7. 3 Alpha descending through 15,000 information, Juliet request ILS runway 27. Ava's voice put the radio back into the world, into the river of other machines that were trying to arrive at the same place from different directions. N73A cleared ILS 27, maintain 170 knots until 5-mile final approach, replied a cadence of authority that always made the Earth feel nearer. Cleared ILS 27, maintain 170 until 5-mile final, N73A. She set altimeters, spun the course knob, armed approach mode. The cabin quieted further, the air taking on that pre-landing expectancy that made even jokes sound like rehearsals. Behind the bulkhead, Sterling's hand shook around a water bottle. The investors kept filming because that was the world now. In the cockpit, the ritual began. Flaps 1. The sound of hydraulics answered. Flaps 2. Another notch, the nose tilting, barely the rate, steadied by a touch on the trim wheel. Gear down. 3 honest thunks, and then the green trinity of assurance. She ran the landing checklist with the simple faith of someone who had written it into her body. The GPWS, voice kind and mechanized, would come later. For now there was the localizer needle hunting center, the glide slope diamond dropping into place, the crosswind a polite hand on the tail. Approach armed. Localizer alive. She caught the descent path like a thread and let the autopilot stitch them to it. Sterling watched without commentary. What he saw wasn't magic, it was fluency. Tiny, unshowy corrections that kept Big Metal obedient. Ava's face was the calm of a person whose competence asked no permission. At 6 miles, she made one last adjustment to the speed. The city hung to the left lake like a second sky to the right. 1,000 little windows threw back the lowering sun, and for a moment the world looked as if it had been made of the same alloy as her airplane. 5 miles approach said. Maintain 170 to 5 mile final. Then after the beat it took to cross a station, only she could hear N73A contact tower. Tower N73A. ILS 275 miles. N73A winds 250 at 8, runway 27 cleared to land. Cleared to land 27 N73A. The GPWS voice arrived on cue calm as an instructor. 500. The runway aligned itself in an invitation no reasonable person would refuse. Ava clicked off the autopilot, took the weight of the airplane fully into her hands, and felt the familiar lift of responsibility lock into its seat. 400. She let the wind have a whisper and took it back with a fingertip. 300. The cabin behind them could have been empty or full. It didn't matter. 200. She felt rather than saw Sterling stop breathing. 100. Lights brightened as if someone were turning a dimmer. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10. The mains kissed the runway like she was touching someone she loved after a very long time. Touchdown. Reversers deployed, she said, not for effect, but because language made action complete. The engines changed their voice. The speed bled. The nose came down so gently the cabin didn't wobble. N73A turn right at Delta contact ground 121.9er. Tower said businesslike, as if grace were ordinary. Right at Delta 121.9er, N73A. On the high-speed turnoff, she stowed the reversers and let the jet roll toward the line of private terminals. The checklists unwound. When the chocks were in and the engines spun down to silence, the cockpit felt like a church after a choir has stopped. Sterling moved first the way a man does when there's nothing left to brace. Ava. About what I said. You meant every word she said, unstrapping, not unkind, not inviting. She slid past him into the cabin where the investors had their lenses still up and their mouths slightly open. Ms. Sinclair, that was extraordinary, one said, sincerity slipping through his practiced cadence. Ava set her badge on the leather seat beside him, the plastic clacking softly in the hush. Consider this my resignation. You can't just Sterling started reflex more than conviction. I can, she said, and the steadiness in her voice was the only permission she needed. And I am. She reached for her bag from the galley, the one that usually held rags and spray. Today it carried her life. Vivian Lee will contact you regarding the hostile environment I endured, she added almost gently because facts didn't need volume to be true. The eldest investor stood. Captain Sinclair, we'd like to discuss a position with our company. You can't poach my pilot, Sterling snapped, an echo of a man who didn't exist anymore. She just resigned, the investor said, not unkindly. And your leadership is now under review. Air thickened. Power moved without ceremony from one body to another, as it always does when the pretense wears off. The assistant stared at the badge on the seat as if it might burn a hole through leather. Ava opened the cabin door. Chicago's gray sky breathed in, edged with cold. Wind shouldered the staircase. Photographers gathered at the bottom like a tide. Flash hit her face in white squares. Captain Sinclair, were you really a janitor, someone called? For 5 years, she said, stepping down into the noise. But today, I just did my old job again. The sentence rippled through microphones and mouths and timelines. She moved through it as if through weather-wrong clothes for the temperature, yes, but her stride unbroken. Behind her in the cabin, Sterling sat down too hard and stared at a spot on the carpet that wasn't there. Out on the tarmac, a jet rotated gear lifting into the wells, sound trailing like a ribbon. The camera crews followed her toward the terminal doors, where glass caught the last light and washed her face in a calm not even the questions could touch. Inside the aircraft, one of the investors looked out at the figure growing smaller among bodies and boom mics and said slowly, as if reporting a fact from a checklist, "That woman just saved your company's life and ended your career." Ava disappeared into the crowd, and then through it, her pace unhurried, the echo of another departure rolling across the concrete. Somewhere above, another airplane turned on final lights bright in the thickening dusk, and the sky did what it always does when a pilot earns it. It made room. By nightfall, the apartment in Doral felt smaller than ever. Ava sat on the sofa in her coveralls, knees drawn up, the blue glow of the television splashing across the cheap coffee table, and the map of scars she didn't show anyone. The banner at the bottom of the screen said, "Breaking News," and the anchor's measured voice rolled out the headline as if it had been waiting for her all along: the janitor who flew the jet. The footage looped her hands on the yoke, the runway, rising the greaser of a touchdown cut with clips from the tarmac where microphones jutted like spears. The video has surpassed 50 million views, the anchor said. Ascent Global Air Stock has dropped 18% in after-hours trading. Light from the screen divided her face into two countries, one in color, one in shadow. Her phone vibrated against the tabletop, then again, then continuously texts, voicemails, subject lines that looked like bait. She let it buzz while the anchor moved from outrage to think piece to panel. When she finally thumbed the screen open, the inbox had the sheen of a shop window: United Private requesting a call tonight. Wheels Up requesting a meeting tomorrow. VistaJet offering a senior captain slot with a signing bonus that would have taken 2 decades of mopping floors. She scrolled slowly, reading the language for what it was. Recognition, they'd call it. Insurance, more likely. A woman who flew a billionaire to safety on a deadline looked good on a brochure. The room smelled faintly of coffee that had gone cold. The cup on the table wore a skin of oil reflecting the TV's light in a sickly crescent. Another buzz, a message request from someone she didn't know. Then another. Ava set the phone down, laced her fingers behind her head, and stared at the picture window. A jet lifted in the distance out of Miami lights, like a necklace humming toward a life untouched by hers. Is this recognition or exploitation? She asked the room out loud, testing the weight of the sentence. The phone rang this time, old-fashioned, insistent, and the name on the screen made her sit up. Vivian Lee. Ava, the attorney, said without preamble, voice quick and warm. I'm taking your case pro bono. 3 more employees reached out tonight. They're ready to go on record about a hostile culture. If you're willing, we don't settle quietly. Ava listened to the plan unfurl: filings, discovery statements, the long procedural grind. Money can fix financial harm, Vivian said. It can't fix culture. Don't let them buy silence. Ava crossed to the window and leaned her forehead to the cool glass. Out over the palmetto, another set of strobes climbed, steady and indifferent. I hear you, she said. I'm not interested in a neat ending. When the call ended, the quiet felt heavier, as if the apartment had inhaled and held it. She clicked the TV volume down to a whisper, but left the image on. The laptop chimed a reporter from the Times asking to feature her in a series on hidden talent. She read the email twice, looking for the trap and not finding more than the usual seams. Before she could answer, a text buzzed in from a number with a military area code. Captain Sinclair. This is Lieutenant Cole Mia Thompson. I trained under Maverick. I heard. He'd be proud. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. She pressed the phone to her chest for a heartbeat, then set it down with a carefulness she didn't fully understand. The investor's live stream had turned her into a symbol before she had a chance to become a person again. The city outside threw up a wash of distant sirens. A motorcycle popped a gear and faded. From the TV, the anchor shifted to a new segment, talking heads weighing contrition against consequence, culture against markets. Sterling's name slid across the chyron. His photo wore a boardroom smile that looked brittle now. In a tower of glass an hour south, he was replaying her landing frame by frame, searching not for loopholes but for the hinge on which his life had turned. She imagined him alone in a room designed for many, the hum of the building like a scold. She pictured his phone face down and vibrating with the fury of board members, clients, journalists. She didn't have to imagine the question in his head. She had heard a version of it at altitude. How did I become this man? Another ring cut through her thoughts. This time she didn't recognize the number until the voice said her name like a remembered lullaby. Sterling, she said to the empty room, then realized it wasn't him at all. Sterling belonged in other people's mouths. The caller was his mother somewhere on the Gulf, telling him what fathers build and sons forget. That part of the story wasn't hers to hold, but she could feel it moving shame, learning the shape of useful. She turned off the television. The apartment darkened to a softer blue, the window gathering what was left of the day and offering it back. The phone buzzed one more time on the table. She let the sound finish and die. In the quiet that followed, she could almost hear the low, familiar exhale of a pressurized cabin at altitude, a sound that kept faith even when people didn't. She breathed with it until her shoulders dropped and her jaw unlocked. Outside, another airplane lifted into the night. She watched the lights until they were stars again, and then nothing at all. Morning came the way it does in Miami, sudden and already warm light spilling across the floor like a promise you weren't sure you'd made. Ava put on a crisp blouse, tied her hair back, and adjusted the laptop camera. The Qatar Airways interviewer appeared in a neat window, polite and unhurried questions about leadership and fuel strategy, and human factors delivered like invitations. She answered cleanly, felt the old muscle remember how to present competence without decoration, and then her phone lit up on the desk with a label she hadn't seen since the hangar. Ascent Global Executive Line. She paused. The interviewer waited with the kind of patience that knew it would be rewarded. "I'm sorry," Ava said. "One moment." She muted thumb to the call and said, "Sinclair. Please don't hang up." The voice was lower than last week, roughened by a night that hadn't ended. "It's Sterling." She didn't fill the silence for him. He did it himself. "I'm offering you a senior captain role," he said, words, choosing plainness over theater, full authority over operations that touch your cockpit, full benefits, and a public apology, wherever you choose, press conference, internal town hall, national TV if you want it. Ava listened to his breathing steady as if he were reading a checklist. "You're trying to save your reputation," she said finally, not unkindly, not unaware of the blade in it. "That's gone," he answered, and she believed him because the lie would have been easier. "I'm stepping down. But 300 people still work here. They didn't mock you on camera. They didn't say the quiet part out loud. They deserve better than my pride. What else? I liquidated 20 million of my personal stake. It's in a foundation for underrepresented pilots' tuition-type ratings, the whole pipeline. The board at Ascent has been restructured. 40% diverse members, including Captain Naomi Sato, U.S. Navy, retired. She spoke about you last night like you were the standard." The name pulled a thread through time. Naomi, with a flight book under her arm, standing a respectful step behind Maverick, absorbing everything and pretending to absorb nothing. Connection unexpected and undeniable. It didn't make this easy. It made it real. "If I even consider coming back," Ava said, "I set the terms." "Name them." She steadied the words on the edge of her tongue. "Hiring authority over all pilot positions. A recruitment mandate prioritizing minorities and veterans. A seat on the Foundation's board with a real vote, not a photo. An independent investigation into discrimination, external, not HR, and anyone found responsible leaves without a golden parachute." "Done," he said, no pause, no negotiation. "All of it. In writing. Today." "I don't offer forgiveness," she said. "I'm not asking. I'm asking for accountability. I broke something I didn't build. Help me rebuild it." She let the line sit between them until the hum of her apartment's air conditioner seemed too loud. "Change is easy to say," she said. "Living it is harder." "Then hold me to it," he said. "Hold all of us to it." "I have another call," she said, and switched back to the waiting window. The interviewer hadn't moved. She apologized, explained nothing, finished the remaining questions with a clarity sharpened by a decision she couldn't name yet. At the end, the recruiter smiled and said the offer would be extended formally by end of day. "I need a week," Ava replied. "There are variables." When the laptop lid closed, the apartment regained its shape. She stood at the counter and poured water over grounds, watched the bloom rise, watched it settle. On the table lay two piles. On the left, the glossy invitations with logos and signatures that promised purpose in exchange for narrative. On the right, a folder with Ascent Global Air in small print on the tab. She put a hand lightly on each. The left felt safe. The right felt like walking back into a fire to show other people the exits. Her phone chimed a calendar invite from a firm she didn't know yet, subject line Independent Investigation Kickoff. Another email from an address at a sent draft language for her hiring authority draft bylaws for the foundation, a proposed date for a public apology she hadn't decided she would accept. She scrolled all the way to the bottom and saw a name that anchored her, Naomi Sato, copied with a short note. Whatever you decide, I'll back the reform. If you come, I expect you to drive. Ava pulled a chair out with her foot and sat. For years she had moved away from the center of things, convinced that distance was the only shelter. Now the past and the future were calling from the same number, asking her to fly toward the place where she had been injured and rebuild it into something that didn't hurt other people. She looked out the window. A jet thundered down the invisible airway above the city, the sound arriving after the motion the way consequences always do. For the first time, she wasn't sprinting from the wreckage. She was studying it, measuring what could be salvaged, deciding what should be melted down and cast into a better shape. She opened her laptop again and typed out a reply to Qatar that was all grace and no apology. 1 week. She typed a second email to Vivian Lee confirming she was in for the long fight. Then she rested both hands on the assent folder and felt under her palms the tremor that comes before lift. The cafe on Brickell had glass for walls, and the morning sun turned the street into a river of chrome. Ava took the corner table with her back to plaster sightlines on the door, a habit that felt less like caution and more like breath. White shirt sleeves rolled her old pilot's watch, ticking softly, as if it had never stopped. She wasn't here to reconcile. She was here to verify whether repentance could survive daylight. Sterling arrived early. That alone marked a shift in the weather. No suit, no armor, just a polo khakis and a face that looked like it had argued all night with itself and lost. He paused at the edge of the table as if waiting for a clearance he might not get. "May I sit?" he asked, voice low. "We're here to talk business," she said. He sat. He lifted a thick folder onto the table and slid it across. The paper was weighty enough to tilt a scale draft authority, granting her control over pilot hiring and standards. A revised charter for a foundation funded with $20 million. Engagement letters with an external firm to investigate discrimination. Timelines. Reporting lines. Names she recognized and some she didn't. Ava read the pages the way she read a pre-flight, methodically pencil notes in the margins, no skipping because the story promised a happy ending. 7 employees terminated already, she said, eyes on the line item. Who handled the review? Not HR, he answered. An outside firm. Their findings go to the board, not to me. I've recused from any personnel decisions. She turned to the foundation section. Endowment amount, governance, quarterly public reports, scholarship criteria that cared about aptitude and obstacle, not optics. She set a finger on the clause that gave her a voting seat. This stays, she said. It stays. She closed the folder and looked at him as if he were a map that required an update. Why are you really doing this? Because I spent 20 years confusing superiority with success. He said, no theatrics. The words arriving like admissions, not lines. You corrected me in 3 hours. It turns out I needed a stall warning I couldn't ignore. He told her about the therapist who'd asked him to name 5 people who cleaned his planes. He couldn't name one. The sentence hung between them, heavy and instructive. She didn't congratulate him for honesty, she noted it and let silence do its work. I have additional conditions, she said. Name them. Marcus Roberts is my deputy. He's earned it. The hangar you turned into a stage becomes a training center for underrepresented pilots, and your marriage line is documented in executive training as an example of what culture will not tolerate. He took out a pen. Marcus as deputy, the hangar conversion, and my words on the record, he repeated, writing each down without negotiation. You'll never forgive me, will you? Forgiveness isn't the goal, she said. Accountability is. A server set 2 coffees on the table and slipped away. They didn't touch them. The folder lay open like a runway with lights buried in the asphalt. Ava paged to the signature blocks. The title above hers read, Chief Pilot and Director of Diversity Initiatives. The words fit not like a trophy but like a tool. She signed. Sterling didn't reach for her hand. He didn't ask for a photo. He just said, You're saving what I destroyed. No, she replied, sliding the folder back. I'm rebuilding what you never saw. They stood at the same time. At the doorway he paused, then bowed his head, a gesture so small it might have been missed by anyone not watching for contrition to move in observable increments. When he left, the bell above the door gave a soft, domestic note at odds with the size of the thing that had just shifted. Outside, the noon wind came off the bay and pushed hard down Brickell. Ava stepped into it, hair-lifted shirt rippling like a flag that refused to claim any nation but her own. Somewhere along the block, a jackhammer broke open an old sidewalk, and the sound felt like a metaphor that didn't need to be explained. She wasn't carrying anger in front of her as a shield or behind her as ballast. She was carrying intention, and it was lighter. Traffic moved. A siren Dopplered past. A plane unseen traced a line overhead. She pictured the hangar with walls torn down and simulators humming where mockery used to echo. She pictured Marcus at her right hand, Naomi at the head of a table that didn't need to be long to be powerful. She pictured a room full of recruits hearing from day one that excellence had no costume. She was going back to the place that had tried to make her small. Not as a ghost and not as a guest, as weather. As the storm that remakes a coastline so it stops pretending it was always meant to look the way it did Monday, put a clean edge on the sky as Ava rolled through the gate at a scent global air. The guard booth door swung open, and Leonard stepped out, cap in hand, surprise knocking the routine out of his posture. Captain Sinclair, he asked, as if verifying identity by miracle. Still me, she said, tapping the new badge. Just finally using the right ID. Inside the building she had once cleaned smelled faintly of lemon and new paint. Heads lifted as she passed, some with apology, some with calculation, some with relief. Ava didn't inventory expressions. She moved the way captains do when they are late to the airplane, not hurried, not slow, simply on time. In the operations room, the roster board looked the same as ever, colonized by dry erase ink. She scanned names and schedules, made 3 quick notes about pairings, and asked for the training records that would tell her who was coasting on charm and who was carrying more than their share. By the time HR arrived with a brittle smile, Marcus Roberts was waiting in the conference room. He met her with a handshake that landed exactly on the line between gratitude and resolve. 15 years in, he carried the calm of a man who had learned to read the temperature of a room before his name was called. About time, someone said it aloud, he murmured after she introduced him to the room as her deputy and told HR in a voice without an inch of wiggle, competence, not convenience, will decide promotions from now on. The meeting ended with silence thick enough to chew. Good. Culture shifts first in the quiet, where people realize the jokes won't land and the shortcuts won't clear. She walked the long corridor to the hangar. The echo that used to follow her mop bucket was replaced by the whir of drills, the sharp scent of sawdust, the high laugh of someone on a scissor lift yelling down measurements. A contractor handed her a hard hat without being asked. She slipped it on and stood under the skeletal beginnings of a mezzanine where classrooms would live. A temporary sign leaned against a crate future site of the Ava Sinclair Training Center. A young engineer, curious and candid, asked, "Why name it after you?" "Because that's where arrogance died," she said, and felt the sentence settle into the concrete. Back in the main building, a familiar figure hovered near the elevators. Sterling's former assistant hands knotted around a tablet. "I should have spoken up that day," she said, the words leaving like contraband. "Then speak up now," Ava said. "We're building a different company." The elevator doors sighed open. In the boardroom, Naomi Sato waited with a stack of printouts and the posture of someone who'd landed on a carrier at night and still preferred the mess hall coffee. The 2 women didn't waste oxygen. They laid out a 90-day plan, open the center by the end of the quarter. Recruit 20 candidates from places the industry didn't bother to look. Sign the MOU with the foundation. Audit pay bands and fix what could be fixed with a pen and a check. Naomi's smile was a quick flicker when they closed the binder. "You're not here to prove a point," she said. "You're here to rebuild trust." "Exactly," Ava answered, feeling the weight of the word, and not minding it. Night found her in an office that looked out over the black square of the airfield. She pinned 3 photos to the wall, Maverick grinning under a rotor disc, Elijah holding Sky on a beach, and a weathered shot of herself in a flight suit visor, up eyes bright with a kind of hope she hadn't recognized as a resource. "We're airborne again," she told them, voice barely above the hum of the HVAC. A knock. Marcus leaned in one hand, still on the doorframe. "First recruits just confirmed," he said. "We have more applicants than slots." "We'll expand," she said, "but we'll keep the bar where the sky keeps it." Morning opened the hangar like a stage. From above, it would have looked like choreography doors, sliding light-pouring flags, stirring a line of students in mismatched jackets and new notebooks, faces alight with the hardest thing in the world to keep belief. Ava stood at the front in the uniform that had once been permission and was now a promise. "My name is Captain Ava Sinclair," she said. "Some of you know my story. Most of you have your own. Here's what matters in this room. Excellence has no uniform. Your past jobs aren't disqualifiers. Your accents aren't obstacles. Your lives have taught you checklists other people never needed. Good. That's experience. We'll turn it into airmanship." She looked down the line and saw a cashier with an aerospace degree, a mechanic who'd learned avionics on his mother's kitchen table, a teacher whose after-school club had built drones that flew truer than the district's excuses. She saw all at once the thing she'd wanted 5 years ago and the thing she couldn't have until now, an institution with its eyes open. "Let's fly," she said. The hum of simulators rose, clipboards shuffled. Marcus peeled off with a cohort and Naomi checked her watch and smiled. The woman who had once pushed a cart past this door moved through it and into the center of the room as if she'd been drawn there by physics, not narrative. The invisible had become instruction. The maintenance badge had become a standard, and the hangar that had been a stage for someone else's performance became at last a school. 6 months after Chicago, the bay in Seattle looked like a sheet of hammered silver outside Sterling's small apartment. The ferry horns wrote their own schedule in sound. Gulls argued over nothing. Rain visited without asking. He made coffee in a dented kettle and walked to a sublet office 3 blocks away where the sign on the door still felt like both penance and possibility. Equal Skies Foundation. No driver, no corner suite, no assistants lining up his day. Just a folding table, a donated couch, 2 laptops and a whiteboard with scholarship timelines drawn in tidy rectangles. In the space where ambition used to rattle, a different quiet had taken hold. He still woke early, but not to beat a competitor to a deal. He woke because the Foundation's inbox filled overnight with lives he hadn't known how to see before, applications dense with flight hours scraped from weekend lessons, essays about working doubles to pay for a discovery flight, letters from mentors who had kept young people in the air with nothing but patience and a gift card. He read until the words blurred, and then read again. On Tuesdays, he sat in on the ground school the Foundation underwrote. That's where he met a teenager with a thick spiral notebook and grease under his nails who said, without drama, "No one ever looked at me twice. Until now." The sentence landed exactly where shame and utility met. He remembered Ava in coveralls sliding past him with a mop bucket, the lens of his life fogged by entitlement. Invisibility had a texture he could finally feel. He let the young man talk and didn't interrupt to advise, didn't reach for a lesson, just listened until the boy ran out of words and replaced them with a grin he didn't know he'd been allowed to own. Back at the folding table, Sterling opened a document titled Remarks and began again. He deleted a paragraph that sounded like branding. He wrote about judgment as a bad habit, not a strategy. About doors mislabeled merit. About power that can't tell the difference between efficiency and dignity. He did not practice an apology for the crowd. He drafted a warning for anyone who might grow into the person he had been. Once a month, Naomi's face appeared on his laptop beside Ava's. Naomi ran the agenda with carrier deck clarity. Ava briefed the numbers from Miami recruit pipeline simulator hours, washouts, and why. She spoke like a captain, precise, economical, allergic to fluff. He kept his microphone on mute until the end, took notes in the margin, and answered only what was asked of him. "Good teamwork," Naomi said after one session. "No." He answered, surprising himself with how easy the correction was. "It's her leadership." Ava didn't smile much in public, but he saw one start and stop in her eyes like a runway light winking. When the training center opened, he flew coach to Miami and took a rideshare to the airport, slipping around the crowd to stand near the fence line. He didn't take a seat on the dais. He watched from the shadows as Ava spoke to a first class of recruits who leaned forward as if the air itself had gravity. She moved through the hangar she'd renamed with the calm of someone who had built it twice, once in her head and once with her hands. Afterward, a reporter spotted him. "Mr. Hayes, are you attending as a sponsor?" He thought about the correct answer and chose the true one. As a student of humility, he said. It traveled farther than he expected, picked up by people who liked a line that owned itself. When the crowd thinned and the microphones went hunting elsewhere, he stayed by the chain link, unsure whether presence would be mistake or contribution. Ava found him there, sun laying a hard gold on the concrete. "The hangar looks different now," he said. "So do you," she replied. No contempt, no invitation. They didn't shake hands. They exchanged a nod that meant we know what we know. He watched her turn back to a cluster of students arguing joyfully about crosswind technique. He walked to the curb and waited for a car. As it pulled away, he looked back through the window at the Global 7500 catching evening on its skin, the old insult scraped off its bones and replaced with something like use. On the flight to Seattle, he finished his remarks. He added a last line and let the cursor blink after it for a long time before saving true leadership begins when pride ends. In Miami, Ava paused under the brushed steel letters bolted to the wall, "Excellence has no uniform," and let the words remind her of the exact thing she was here to protect. 2 rebuilds were underway now, one in a person, one in a place, and each made the other more possible. By summer's end, the training center hummed like a well-flown pattern. On graduation day, 20 recruits stood in 2 crisp ranks, shoulders squared, eyes shining the way metal shines when it's been burnished by work. Families held up phones and tears in equal measure. Cameras crowded the back wall where the banners hung. Ava took the podium and let the silence settle until the room was listening the way a cockpit listens at decision speed. "Skill has no color," she said, "and dignity has no price." She told a short story about checklists and why they exist, not because people are weak, but because people are human. She named the instructors who had turned raw desire into procedures. She named the obstacles too, and then refused to let them be the headline. Marcus called each graduate by name, placed a certificate in each hand. A young woman with a braid tight as a rope whispered as she stepped off the stage. "You gave us wings." Ava shook her head. "You built them," she said. "We just made sure the rivets held." After the applause had folded back into talk, a senator in a Navy suit stepped onto the stage with a staffer and a folder. "Congress just passed a training support package for underrepresented pilots," she announced. It was inspired by this program and by the woman who refused to be humiliated quietly. The room made a new sound, one between relief and resolve. Ava accepted the handshake and redirected the credit as easily as a crosswind correction. "I did what any pilot does," she said to the microphones. Corrected course mid-flight. Later in her office, the phone buzzed. Sterling calling from Seattle ferry horns faint behind his hello. "Equal Skies approved 10 new scholarships," he said. "We're naming one for Maverick Jones." Ava closed her eyes and saw a rotor disc catching dawn. When she opened them, the room returned with edges in place. "That's the first decision of yours I fully approve," she said, and heard both of them laugh, a cleaner sound than any they'd managed before. Her calendar thickened with invitations, airlines abroad asking for help replicating the model, a regulator wanting her on a task force, a university offering an adjunct slot. She said yes to the ones that served the mission and no to the ones that served someone's optics. She kept flying. In the Global's left seat with a trainee strapped into the right, she briefed an empty failure and meant it. "Takeoff is yours." The trainee glanced over. "Are you sure confidence comes from trust?" Ava said, folding her hands lightly in her lap. "I trust you." The throttles went forward. The runway blurred into speed. Airspeed alive. V1. Rotate. The trainee lifted the nose into air that accepted them as if the permission had been granted long ago. The program's impact spilled beyond the hangar doors. Leonard, once the guard who split sandwiches with a janitor at midnight, now ran logistics like he'd been born with a Gantt chart in his head. Elena from accounting took night classes and showed up on Saturdays for ground school, her ledger balanced between debits and dreams. Marcus flew south to stand up a satellite program in Bogota and sent back photos of students beaming under a hand-painted banner. Industry headlines caught up Ava Sinclair's model adopted by 3 major airlines. The words looked clinical on a homepage and incandescent in real lives. One evening when the light in her apartment went the color of old honey, Ava took down a frame and set it on the table. Elijah and Sky in a snapshot of unguarded summer. Maverick in a second-frame chin lifted at a laugh that had survived in other people's throats. "We made it," she said, not as triumph, just as truth. She placed her first set of pilot wings beside her current cap, past and present sharing a small square of wood without competing for space. Dusk put a soft edge on Opalaka. In the cockpit of a Global 7500, Ava settled the headset over her hair and looked back at 3 students strapped in behind her, eyes wide and hands fidgeting because they hadn't yet learned how to make calm look casual. The runway lights came up like a constellation. She eased the throttles and felt the aircraft lean into its purpose. They accelerated. The runway fell away. Miami tilted into geometry. The jet climbed into a sky rinsed with late gold. She felt the familiar lightness at rotation, the small surrender that happens when 200,000 pounds decide to believe in lift. Her voice found the intercom. "This is what it feels like when skill meets opportunity," she said. No one answered. They were too busy grinning. 5 years of silence had taught her humility. One flight had taught the world humanity. Now the story didn't need a headline to exist. It circulated in the way a student squared shoulders before a check ride, in the way a hiring manager reached for a different stack of resumes, in the way an old hangar remembered an old sin and housed a better future. The jet arced toward the last light. The field dropped behind them and distance turned into perspective. On the tarmac below, new students walked out to touch the skin of the airplane that would later carry them. In the offices, Naomi drafted another agreement. In Seattle, a scholarship committee clicked send. The sky accepted all of it without judgment, as it always had. The closing line belonged not to a press release but to the view forward. The runway gone, the climb steady, the horizon honest. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to claim it. Every storm runs out of rain. Every pain eventually reveals purpose. What matters is who we become in the waiting. How's the weather where you are as you hear this, cold and gray or full of light? Either way, take a second to tell us what this story meant to you. And if you'd like to keep walking through tales of hope and redemption, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.